He was lying on the ground, face bruised, shirt torn, hands shaking, as laughter echoed from behind the glass doors. The man they had just pushed out of the building like garbage lay there, covered in dirt, crying. But they didn't know. They didn't know the man they mocked, insulted, and kicked out wasn't just any beggar. He was their boss. Joshua Anderson, billionaire CEO of Undertech. And the silence that fell when the branch manager ran out and screamed, "Do you know who this is?" That silence would change everything. But let's go back to how it started. Joshua Anderson wasn't the kind of billionaire you saw on TV. He didn't wear gold chains or arrive with bodyguards. He had no flashy cars parked in front of his office. In fact, if you saw him walking past, you'd probably think he was a regular staff or even a cleaner. But at just 30 years old, Joshua had built one of the biggest tech companies in Africa, Undertech. And what made him truly different wasn't just his intelligence, but his heart. He had come from nothing. Born in a tiny village in Kogi State, raised by a mother who sold puff puff by the roadside, Joshua knew what it meant to be poor. He knew hunger, pain, and how the world treated people with nothing. That was why, after building his company, he made one promise to himself. My company must be known not only for innovation, but for kindness and humility. So, to keep that standard alive, Joshua did something most CEOs would never dare to do. He went undercover. He would dress like a poor man, sometimes a cleaner, sometimes a beggar, and visit branches of Undertech to see how his staff treated people they thought were nobodies. And now, it was time to test his new branch in Port Harcourt. The sun had barely risen when Joshua's private jet landed quietly at the Port Harcourt airport. He stepped out, dressed in simple jeans and a faded t-shirt, but not for long. In a small, rented bathroom, he began his transformation. He poured muddy water on his clothes, rubbed dust on his face, and wore an overgrown curly wig that covered his forehead and ears. His beard was tangled, dark, and filled with lint. His eyes looked tired and purpose, and in his hand he held an old nylon bag with one torn file inside. To the world, he looked homeless, but inside that bag was something more powerful than gold documents that proved he was the real owner of the entire building. As he approached the tall Undertech Port Harcourt building, he watched employees dressed in bright clothes walk in, smiling and laughing. He waited until the security guard looked away, then slipped in quietly through the side gate. Inside the reception area, 6 staff members sat behind glossy desks, sipping coffee and chatting. The floor was spotless, the AC cold, and a big banner on the wall read, "Undertech, building the future with kindness and innovation." Joshua walked forward, trembling slightly to sell the role, and stood near the front desk. I want to see the manager, please," he said in a soft voice. The receptionist, Sandra, glanced at him and almost choked on her tea. "Wait. What?" she laughed. Everyone turned. Catherine, Cynthia, and 3 of Sandra's friends looked up and stared at the man standing before them, muddy, smelly, and clearly poor. "You want to see the manager?" Catherine asked with a grin. "Do you think this is a charity center? I need just a moment. Please, Cynthia stood. "See your life. You didn't even say cleaner. You said manager? The manager of Undertech? A whole tech company?" She laughed louder now. "He must think this is a hospital," Sandra added mockingly. "Let me guess. Your wife is dying and you need help? Or you want to beg for work looking like that?" The others burst into laughter. Joshua bowed his head. "I'm begging you. I just need to speak to the manager." Then it happened. One of them pushed his shoulder hard. Another slapped the file from his hand, and the last one smiling grabbed his bag and threw it outside. "You don't belong here, madman," Catherine yelled. "Go back to where you came from." And then they dragged him, out of the building, out of the glass doors, onto the street. He hit the ground with a loud thud, his elbows scraping the concrete. His file lay beside him, crushed. People across the road stared, but inside the building, they laughed like it was a joke, like they had just chased a dog out. That was when the door burst open again, and this time, it wasn't Joshua. It was Andrew, the branch manager. He had heard the noise and stepped out to see what was going on. But what he saw froze him in place. Joshua, lying on the floor, shirt torn, covered in dirt. The staff, still laughing. Andrew's voice shook the walls. "What did you do? Do you know who this is?" The laughter stopped. The smiles faded. Sandra took one step back. Cynthia almost dropped her coffee cup. Andrew ran forward and helped Joshua stand. "I'm so sorry, sir, please. I had no idea," Andrew said, breathless. Joshua said nothing at first. He wiped his face, picked up the torn file, and turned to face them. Each of the staff dropped to their knees, now crying. "Please, sir, forgive us. We didn't know." But Joshua wasn't looking at them. He looked at Andrew. "Even if they're the most skilled workers in this state," Joshua said slowly, "we cannot work with them. Not here. Not in this company." Andrew nodded, chest tight, heart racing. "We don't only hire skill, we hire character, we hire compassion. And what I just saw here today," he paused, "is everything I've worked my whole life to fight against." One by one, their names were called. One by one, they were dismissed. And as the tears flowed and the begging began, none of them could believe the truth. The man they bullied was the billionaire they always bragged about working for. Joshua Anderson. That night, Sandra sat alone in a one-room apartment with no fan and no food, tears running down her face. On the tiny table beside her lay the newspaper headline, "Undertech CEO exposes staff in undercover visit. 5 dismissed for bullying." And just as she stood to switch off the light, her phone buzzed. She picked it up. It was a message. She read the message carefully, her eyes widening with excitement, as she was invited for an interview tomorrow at one of the small companies she'd applied to. But her joy was short-lived. She dropped her phone and burst into tears when she thought of what they had done to themselves. The next morning, Sandra gathered the little money she had and prayed that it would be enough to cover the taxi fare to her destination. As she stepped out of the taxi, she asked the driver for her change, but he refused, claiming the amount was correct. Sandra insisted, knowing she had given him more than the fare, and she desperately needed the balance since it was all the money she had. In the heat of the argument, she stepped onto the road and was hit by an incoming motorcycle. She lost consciousness and was rushed to the hospital. Sandra's eyes fluttered open. Bright lights, white ceiling, beeping sounds, the faint smell of antiseptic. She tried to sit up but winced in pain. Her left leg was bandaged. Her arms were scraped. A nurse rushed in. "You're awake. Thank God." Sandra blinked. Where am I?" "General Hospital," the nurse replied gently. "You had an accident. You hit your head." Sandra closed her eyes as tears escaped from the corners. Her heart ached not just from the bruises but from everything. It had only been 2 months since she was dismissed from Undertech. Life had gone downhill fast. No company wanted her. Her name had made rounds on social media. Her face had appeared in headlines. Arrogant staff bullied billionaire CEO disguised as a beggar. Doors shut the moment her CV hit HR desks. Even her friends had started avoiding her, except a few Catherine, Cynthia, and the others who were dismissed with her. They were all broken, struggling, and angry at the world. But now, here she was injured, jobless, and alone. At least, that's what she thought. Until the door opened. She turned slowly and froze. Standing there, with quiet confidence and eyes that held no anger, was Joshua Anderson. Sandra's lips trembled. "Sir?" Joshua stepped in, holding a brown paper bag. Behind him, her 4 former colleagues, Catherine, Cynthia, Blessing, and Linda stood at the door, wide-eyed in disbelief. None of them could speak. "Good afternoon," Joshua said calmly. "Can I come in?" Sandra burst into tears. She tried to sit up again, but he raised his hand gently. "Don't stress yourself." "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I don't know what came over us. That day I'm not here for an apology," Joshua replied. He placed the bag on the side table. "I paid your hospital bills. You need to rest. Eat. Heal." Catherine entered slowly. Sir, you came to visit her? He turned to them. All of you. They looked at each other, confused. Joshua sighed, then sat in the visitor's chair. When I left the Port Harcourt branch that day, I told Andrew something. They listened, barely breathing. I said morals are just as important as skills. That still stands. But I also believe people can grow. People can change. You just have to want it. No one said a word. Then Joshua looked at Sandra. You were cruel. But I've seen cruelty before. What struck me that day was the emptiness behind your anger, like you were fighting something inside. Sandra wiped her eyes. I lost my father 2 years ago. My brother is disabled. I pay rent for my mother's shop. I was angry at life, and I poured it on everyone else. Joshua nodded. We all have pain, but it's what we do with it that defines us. He reached into his coat and pulled out 5 neatly sealed envelopes. Each one had a name. Sandra, Catherine, Cynthia, Blessing, Linda. They looked down at the envelopes in his hand. These are letters of reinstatement. They gasped. Sandra's lips parted. What? I spoke with Andrew. Joshua continued. You'll all return to undercover probation. You'll resume as interns. No fancy positions, no titles, no special seats. You'll rebuild your trust, from the ground up. Linda's knees buckled and she sat down. Sir, you don't have to do this. Yes, Cynthia whispered. After everything we did? I know, Joshua replied, but sometimes people don't need punishment. They need a second chance. 3 months later, back at Undercover's Port Harcourt branch, everything had changed. Sandra now arrived early before even the cleaners. She wore simple clothes. She helped the receptionist arrange chairs. She even brought snacks for the janitors. Catherine and Blessing were seen guiding visitors politely to their offices. Cynthia and Linda volunteered to train new staff on emotional intelligence. Rumors spread fast. Those are the girls that bullied the CEO. Yes, and he brought them back. Now they're the most humble people in this place. But no one was more surprised than Andrew, the branch manager. These were no longer the arrogant girls he once feared would ruin his branch's image. They had become the heartbeat of the office. Then, one day, during a youth empowerment conference sponsored by Undercover, the 5 ladies were invited to speak. Dressed in matching Ankara gowns, they stood on stage, eyes full of emotion. Sandra stepped forward first. We were once the kind of people who thought power made us important, that the job made us better than others. We laughed at a man because of his clothes, not knowing he owned the building. The crowd gasped. Catherine continued. But he didn't fight us. He taught us. He gave us a second chance. And that changed everything. Tears rolled down cheeks in the audience. The women smiled at each other. Today, we've created something new. A foundation. For people like us. For anyone who was once broken, angry, or forgotten. Sandra raised her hand. It's called Second Chance. Thunderous applause filled the hall. In the front row, Joshua Anderson clapped slowly. A soft smile played on his lips. The man they once mocked had become the reason they found purpose. As the conference ended and the crowd began to leave, a man in a dark suit approached Joshua quietly. Sir, something strange just happened at the Lagos branch, he whispered. Joshua raised a brow. Strange? Yes, sir, there's a woman who says she's your sister, and she's demanding to take over Undercover. Joshua stood still, his face suddenly unreadable. My sister is dead, he said coldly. But something in his eyes flickered. Was this the start of a new storm? Joshua Anderson sat in the back seat of his car, staring through the window as the city of Lagos flew past in a blur. The man beside him, his personal investigator, Kunle, remained silent, but Joshua's mind wasn't quiet. She says her name is Chiamaka, Kunle finally said. Early 30s, dark-skinned, slender. Claims she grew up in Benue State after your mother supposedly abandoned her during the war. Joshua's jaw tightened. I'm an only child, he replied. Sir, Kunle said carefully. She came with papers, photos, Even a copy of a birth certificate with your mother's name on it." Joshua turned sharply. "A forged document means nothing." "I agree," Kunle said, "but she looks exactly like your mother. Like you." Chair was silence. That was the problem. Joshua had no living family. His mother died 10 years ago. He had buried her himself. His father was never in the picture. For years, he had carried the loneliness of being the last Anderson. So how could someone walk in now, claiming to be blood? They arrived at the Undertech Lagos headquarters, a shining skyscraper in Victoria Island. The moment Joshua stepped out of the car, security stood straighter, staff whispered, and cameras blinked. He ignored it all. "Where is she?" he asked. "Conference room 4, Kunle replied. They walked fast, straight to the private executive floor. Joshua stopped just before the door, took a breath, and opened it. Inside sat a woman, tall, graceful, and calm. She stood as he entered. "Joshua," she said softly. He stared at her hard. Her face, it was hauntingly familiar. The sharp jawline, the high cheekbones, the almond-shaped eyes. He said nothing. "I'm not here to take your company," she said. I've been searching for years. My mother told me about you before she passed away." He frowned. "Your mother?" She nodded. Her name was Grace. Joshua felt the name hit like thunder. That was his mother's name too, but it didn't make sense. "I buried my mother," he said. 10 years ago." She stepped closer. "So did I." Joshua remembered the day. Rain pouring down in the village. A cheap coffin. A woman lying peacefully with hands folded across her chest. But what if? What if she had left behind something she never told him about? A secret child? He shook his head. "Why come now?" Chiamaka took out a folded letter from her bag. "This is from her," she said. "She asked me never to come forward unless I was truly ready to forgive her for keeping us apart." Joshua hesitated, then took the letter. It was his mother's handwriting, shaky, emotional, and real. "My dear children, if you ever find each other, I pray you forgive me. I did what I had to do to survive. The war separated us. The pain kept us apart. But I loved you both. Always." His hands trembled slightly. Later that night, Joshua sat alone in his private penthouse, the letter lying open beside him. If this was true, he had a sister, a real sister. But then why now? Why show up just as Second Chance was launching? Why appear when Undertech was expanding across 3 countries? He picked up his phone and dialed Kunle. "Keep eyes on her. I want a full background check, birth records, schools, even her fingerprints." "Already on it," Kunle replied. "But there's something else." Joshua waited. "She's been meeting secretly with one of our former board members, Mr. Kelvin Dyke." Joshua's heart sank. Kelvin. The same man he had forced to resign 3 years ago for embezzling millions. This was no coincidence. The next morning, Sandra sat in the Second Chance office when Joshua walked in, face tense, voice low. "I need your help," he said. Sandra stood quickly. "Yes, sir." He looked her in the eyes. "You've seen both sides of life. You know what betrayal looks like. I need someone who can read people." Sandra's eyes widened. "You think she's lying?" "I don't know what to believe," he said. "But I trust you." She nodded, suddenly aware of how far she'd come. Just months ago, she had spat on this man. Now, he was asking for her help. "I'll talk to her," she said. "As a woman, as someone who's been given a second chance." Joshua nodded slowly. "Don't let her know I sent you." Later that day, Chiamaka sat at a cafe on the island when Sandra walked in. They had agreed to meet as 2 women trying to understand each other. Sandra smiled politely and sat down. "You must be overwhelmed. Finding a brother like Joshua." Chiamaka smiled. "It's been a whirlwind." They talked about childhood, about life, about the pain of abandonment. But as the minutes passed, Sandra noticed small cracks in Chiamaka's story, dates that didn't match, a photograph that looked too recent to be from the 90s, and the way Chiamaka kept checking her phone nervously. Then it happened. Chiamaka stood to go to the restroom, leaving her phone behind. It buzzed. Sandra hesitated, then picked it up. A message flashed on the screen. Kelvin says the board will support your claim if Joshua resists. He has copies of the fake DNA ready. Don't mess this up. Sandra's breath caught in her throat. Fake DNA? Kelvin? It was a setup. She had to act fast. That evening, Sandra ran into Joshua's office, sweating. "She's not your sister," she shouted. But just behind her, the doors opened again. Chiamaka stood there, eyes cold, smile gone, and beside her was Kelvin Dyke, back from the shadows. "You're right," Chiamaka said. "I'm not your sister, but that won't matter once I take everything you built." Joshua rose slowly from his chair, his eyes, calm but deadly, locked onto Kelvin Dyke, the man he had once trusted with his boardroom secrets. Kelvin, now dressed in a navy blue designer suit and fake confidence, stepped in beside Chiamaka, who stood with arms folded, her fake smile gone. The silence in the room could slice steel. Joshua's voice was low, controlled. "You faked an identity, created a sister, and now you think you can take over Undertech?" Kelvin chuckled. Joshua, always too noble for your own good. You built this empire with your heart. But in business, heart doesn't win. Strategy does. Chiamaka added coldly, "And when the media sees a woman claiming to be your long-lost sister with documents, a DNA test, and Kelvin's support on the board, do you think your reputation will survive the scandal?" Sandra stepped forward. "We have proof. The text messages, the fake documents, the DNA scam." Kelvin laughed. "You think anyone will believe a disgraced former staff turned charity worker? We've already rewritten the story, and in the court of public opinion, we've already won." Joshua didn't move. He slowly sat back down and pulled out his phone. Tapped once. A red light blinked on the edge of the bookshelf. Kelvin's smirk faded. Joshua looked at him. "You forgot, Kelvin. This is Undertech. Every boardroom has smart surveillance. You just confessed. On record." Chiamaka turned pale. Sandra's jaw dropped. Joshua turned the screen to them and pressed play. Their voices echoed back clearly. "He has copies of the fake DNA ready. Don't mess this up. I'm not your sister. Once I take everything you built." Checkmate. Kelvin reached forward, trying to grab the phone. Two security officers burst in. Joshua stood, finally. "You once told me business was all about power, Kelvin, but I learned something else on my way up." He stepped toward them. "Character sustains what strategy can build. You can't destroy what you never built." With a wave of his hand, the guards handcuffed Kelvin and led him away, silent and defeated. Chiamaka, now shaking, collapsed into the chair. Tears streamed down her face. I was desperate," she whispered. "Kelvin found me when I had nothing. I thought I could start over." Joshua stood still, heart heavy. "Then why lie?" he asked quietly. "Why fake family?" She looked up at him. "Because you were everything I ever dreamed of in a brother. And I thought if I had a story, you might let me close." He closed his eyes. So much pain. So many lies. And yet, 2 days later, the news hit headlines across Nigeria. Fake sister and ex-board member try to overthrow Undertech CEO secret recording saves company. Sandra Ogudu, former disgraced staff, helps expose billionaire CEO scam plot. The country buzzed. On social media, Sandra became a trending topic. From disgrace to grace. Undertech scandal. Second chance saves the day. People were inspired by the turnaround. That week, Joshua called a company-wide town hall. Every branch tuned in. Thousands of employees watched. He stepped onto the stage at the Lagos HQ. The light hit him just right, calm, confident, and human. Beside him stood Sandra. She was no longer a disgraced intern. She was now the official director of ethics and employee culture for Undertech. Sandra spoke first. "I once laughed at a stranger, not knowing he was my boss. I lost my job. I lost my dignity. But I got a second chance. And now, I've been trusted to protect the very thing I once tried to destroy. Joshua followed with powerful words. Undertech was never about money, or fame, or titles. It was always about people. You don't build a future with code alone. You build it with character. Thunderous applause. That night, as Joshua sat alone in his office, his phone buzzed. A message popped up. Unknown number. You may have stopped Kelvin, but I know the truth about your past, and I'm coming for what's mine. D.A. Joshua stared at the message, eyes narrowing. Who was D.A.? What did they know? And why did it feel familiar? Joshua Anderson didn't blink. His eyes remained locked on the message glowing on his screen. You may have stopped Kelvin, but I know the truth about your past, and I'm coming for what's mine. D.A. The initials struck a strange chord deep within him. D.A. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had seen those letters before, somewhere buried, somewhere painful. His mind raced. In the last 3 months, he had battled humiliation, exposed betrayal, reinstated those who once bullied him, and even watched a stranger pretend to be his sister. But this felt different. This felt personal. By morning, Kunle, his ever-loyal investigator, was already working. Sir, I've pulled up all known enemies with the initials D.A., Kunle said, spreading documents across the conference table. I also traced the number that sent the text. It pinged off a burner phone. Lagos Island. Discarded after one message. Joshua picked up one file. Deborah Awole, he asked. Former Undertech cleaner, Kunle replied. Fired 5 years ago for attempting to steal software files from a senior engineer. Joshua shook his head. She was in prison until last year. She wouldn't dare. He moved to the next file. David Akinlabi? Kunle paused. Yes, and I believe he's the one. Joshua looked up. Why? Kunle pulled up an old Undertech employee profile. David Akinlabi. Smart. Creative. Quiet. He was one of our earliest coders, Kunle said. Helped design the original prototype of our communication software, left the company before we went global. Joshua frowned. He didn't just leave. He walked out after an argument. Said I stole his idea. Kunle nodded. And now, he's back. Flashback. 10 years ago, Joshua sat at a plastic table inside a small room in Kogi State, his laptop overheating beneath his fingers. David stood over him. We agreed this was our dream, David had said. Not just yours. I know, Joshua replied, but the investors need one name. Just until the company grows. Then I'll put your name back. David's voice rose. So I get erased first. While you shine. I'm not trying to erase you, David. But it was too late. David stormed out and never returned. Joshua later heard rumors of him moving abroad, starting again. But they never spoke again. Back to present. He wants revenge, Joshua said quietly. Kunle nodded. And now that the company is at its peak, Joshua stood. He wants to tear it down. 3 days later, a national tech summit was coming up in Abuja. Joshua was scheduled to give the keynote speech. Every major tech leader, investor, and media house would be there. Security was high, but tension was higher. Kunle walked beside him backstage. I'm certain David will try something, either to expose something from your past or humiliate you in public. Joshua straightened his tie. Let him try. He walked to the podium. The lights were blinding. Thousands of cameras flashed. Joshua began. 10 years ago, I was just a village boy with a borrowed laptop and a dream. Today, Undertech has created over 10 zero jobs across Africa. But this story was never mine alone. The audience clapped. It was built by many hands. Some loyal, some disloyal, some who stayed, some who walked away, and some who are here today. Gasps. A man in the middle row stood. He wore a black suit, neatly shaved, confident, smirking. David Akinlabi. Mr. Anderson, he shouted. Would you tell the world the truth? That Undertech's original codebase was mine? The room froze. Tell them how you erased me, how you sold my dream and left me in the shadows. Phones came up. Journalists started typing. Joshua didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled. David, welcome back. Murmurs. You're right. You helped build the original idea. And yes, you walked away. But I never erased you. In fact, he pulled a paper from his jacket. In our original partnership agreement, which I registered quietly with the CAC, your name was never removed. Your 10% share still exists. You were never removed from the founding structure. Gasps again. David's face twitched. That's not possible. Joshua turned the paper around for the cameras. It is. You left in anger. I kept your share in your absence. You could have come back at any time, but instead, you chose revenge. He walked forward now, voice calm but firm. I may have built this company alone for a while, but I never forgot where I started. That's why I gave second chances to those who hurt me. Because people matter. Character matters. Then came the bombshell. But what I can't allow is sabotage. He turned to the back. Security entered. David Akinlabimi legal team has compiled evidence that you and Kelvin Dyke attempted to hack Undertech's patent registry last week. You cloned our signature product and tried to sell it under your new firm abroad. The crowd erupted. David's smirk dropped. Two men stepped forward and escorted him out. Joshua stepped back to the podium. The only thing stronger than innovation is integrity. 1 week later, Joshua sat in his office. A new award sat on his shelf, Tech Leader of the Decade. Sandra knocked gently and entered. We just passed 20 million users, sir, she said proudly. And there's someone who wants to see you. Joshua looked up. Chiamaka. She stepped in, this time wearing no makeup, no fancy bag, just simple clothes. Humble, quiet. I wanted to thank you, she said, for not pressing charges, for giving me back my name. Joshua nodded. She continued, I've taken a job in Makurdi, helping kids in rural schools with computer literacy. It's something I want to do with truth this time. Joshua smiled. Good. Everyone deserves a real second chance, not a faked one. She bowed her head. Thank you. 3 months later, the final speech. At a special event held to celebrate Undertech's 10-year anniversary, Joshua stood on stage again. Behind him were the faces of everyone who had once failed but rose again, Sandra, Catherine, Blessing, Linda, and even former staff who once left bitterly. Joshua's voice carried like thunder. This company was built with code, but its heart beats because of people. People who changed, people who learned, and people who rose again. Today, Second Chance Foundation officially becomes part of Undertech's corporate culture, funded to help those who made mistakes, but are ready to rebuild. The crowd stood. Applause thundered. And as Joshua looked into the crowd, he saw the faces that had tried to break him, and the ones who helped him rebuild. And that was when he realized something. The greatest empire wasn't built by being the strongest, but by being the kindest. What is your view about this story? Where are you watching from? If you enjoyed this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.